Hello, this is a BICOM podcast. I'm Richard Pater, the director of BICOM here in Israel, and I'm delighted to be joined today with Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who is the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem with special responsibility for tourism and international engagement. She is also the founder of the Israel-UAE Business Council, something that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Fleur, thank you very much for joining me.
It's always wonderful to join you.
So before we get into it, I just wanted to make a couple of comments and observations about the Israel visit to the UAE earlier this week. And I think it's very easy to be cynical about these things, especially kind of in the context that the timing may well be about the Trump re-election campaign and building a ceremony just before that. But I was struck by a couple of points. First of all, that the framing of the Abrahamic Accords and building around the monotheistic faiths, I think, is really significant. If people saw the photos of the people in the synagogue putting on the tefillin in the morning, the phylacteries of the Jewish men put on in prayers every morning, shouldn't be taken for granted that this can happen in the Arab world. And I think that that's kind of the framing of it around the monotheistic faiths is a very optimistic and important lesson. And it reminded me of something we have here in Jerusalem of the Bible Lands Museum, which also frames it in a similar sense of making that commonality between peoples that kind of predates organized religion and showing that all the people, Jews, Muslims and Christians, have a shared inheritance to this area. The second thing that I was struck with was that, quite uncharacteristic of the Israeli government, they put out a detailed press release talking about all the range of civilian infrastructure projects and cooperation. So this really is being lined up as a positive, warm peace. And I suppose that's where I wanted to start with you, Fleur. If you could just tell us about the founding of the Israel-UAE Business Council. What was your motivation and what's your plan?
So I agree with your observations. I think that we were all extremely moved to see the atmosphere of the trip, how the Israelis were received, how the Israelis were so excited. And it just, I think, points to a real thirst for real peace. And I think that's what we're seeing. Now, my motivation for creating the Business Council, the Emirates, the UAE Israel Business Council, originally was for the good of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is actually a city which is the most diverse city in the country. We have 37% Arab-speaking population here. And initially, when I started to think about the relations that we could have with the Gulf, I saw it as a way that we could collaborate, cooperate to bring investment to East Jerusalem, because this is a part of the city that, of course, we are developing very intensively for the good of all the residents, but mainly for the good of the Arab residents of the city. We are working very hard to bring quality employment, real infrastructural change and better education for the Arabs of East Jerusalem. And I saw the connection with the Gulf as a fantastic way of building a bridge between Jerusalem and the Gulf through its Arab community here.
And how receptive have you found people on the other side, the Emiratis that you've been able to engage with?
Extremely receptive. First of all, the same thirst that I find that we have here for peace, I saw on the other side. There's so much excitement. There's so much. It's always I read somebody said something today. It's like we're dating. It's very interesting because it's like they don't know us. They've got all these preconceptions that they've been taught. They tell us, we were taught that you're like this and you're like this. And all of a sudden, something has switched and they're very curious. They want to get to know us and they do understand that a strategic partnership will bring enormous amount of prosperity. I see it from my point of view, prosperity to this country. Let's not forget the UAE has the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, even bigger than Saudi Arabia. And so, and in 20, 30 years, crude oil might not be something relevant anymore. So they're definitely looking to expand their influence, their economic future. And we have always, Israel since the beginning, has always opened its arms to anybody, any neighbor that's wanted peace. And so the excitement is palpable. The people what makes our organization unique is that we are, I think, the only organization, our UAE Business Council, that has been created with Israelis and Emiratis together. It's not the Israel Chamber of Commerce and the Emirati Chamber of Commerce. We've created an organization of both Israelis and Emiratis, and I believe that the only way to warm peace is people-to-people engagement, interaction, business, cultural, tourism, and otherwise.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of projects that you've lined up for this sort of cooperation?
So at the moment it's very embryonic. We just had a strategy session, for example, today. What we want to do is not just foster and nurture really good business relations, but we're talking about really high-level business relationships, public and private sector. And of course, I'm coming from the public sector. I'm very engaged also with the Americans, who are extremely invested in the normalization process in the region. And this to them, of course, is their first major success. And so we're talking about very high-level projects. I'm pushing them, of course, into East Jerusalem. We're talking about possibly an industrial zone, high-tech zone, and even the possibility of some type of hospital, a regional hospital, children's hospital that we could put together. At the moment, I can't really elaborate too much. It's very embryonic, but there's certainly very serious public-private partnerships in play here.
Sounds fantastic. Let's put the UAE aside for a moment. Within your regular focus as Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, what else can you tell us that's already ongoing about development issues and projects within East Jerusalem?
Well, we've got a number of very exciting projects. First of all, we're building a huge high-tech area in Wadi Joz, which is the closest neighborhood, let's say, to the old city. And we're going to call it Silicon Valley. And basically what we want to bring there, we're bringing tens of thousands of meterage in commercial property, shops, high-tech offices, and hotels. This is the first ever project of its nature to take place in East Jerusalem. I'm the first one to admit that for many years Israel didn't really know what to do with East Jerusalem. Many people thought, oh, why bother? They're going to be part of a Palestinian state one day as a capital. Why are we investing? And there are many, many gaps in infrastructure. 2 years ago, the Jerusalem Affairs Minister at the time, Zev Elkin, tried to pass a government decision to close those gaps. We have unprecedented budgets coming from the Israeli government into East Jerusalem for three main things: education, infrastructural development like sewage and pavements and things like that, and also quality employment. So the Silicon Valley falls into two of those categories, which is quality employment and infrastructural development.
Thank you. I mean, you mentioned education. I know one of the other issues you're very concerned about is the state of the textbooks that East Jerusalemites have access to. What are your concerns there, and what are you doing about it?
I'm very concerned because the only way to really have long-lasting, sustainable peace or to live in a shared society is to have children believing that they can live together. And what we have is a situation where, unfortunately, for historical reasons, 93% of the schools in East Jerusalem are run by the Palestinian Authority, directly or indirectly through non-profit organizations. On top of that, we've also got about 27 UNRWA schools, and what they share is that both the UNRWA schools and the Palestinian Authority schools use the same curriculum, which is the Palestinian Authority curriculum. This curriculum is not only not fostering peace, it's fostering hatred and incitement and a complete obsession with the right of return, which means that none of this is going to be what we can actually build on to create a shared society and a sustainable peace here. And so I've been to the British government and I've asked for help. Britain is the third or second largest contributor to the UNRWA. As we have seen, the United States have stopped funding UNRWA for precisely this reason. I went to the House of Lords in January to ask for their help in, I'm not saying don't provide help to UNRWA. I'm saying make the help conditional on a curriculum that fosters peace, understanding, and reconciliation, and not incitement, glorification of martyrdom, and anti-Semitism. And so we have a very ridiculous situation where the United Kingdom government did heed our call. Started a number of years ago. They went to the EU. The EU appointed a private research company in Germany called the Theeckhart Institute to look into this issue of the Palestinian Authority school books. The Theeckhart Institute comes back 2 weeks ago telling us that everything is fine and there's no incitement in the Palestinian school book. But unfortunately, they were working from the wrong material, and they were analyzing Arab-Israeli school books that we use in our schools in East Jerusalem rather than Palestinian Authority school books. And so they've spent £220,000 of UK taxpayers' money on the wrong research. So this is the farce that we're seeing. We don't need a company to analyze the books for 2 years to know that when the maps have got no Israel on the map, when the math questions are about martyrs and dead Jews, and the physics questions are about the velocity of a catapult to an Israeli soldier, we really don't need a research institute to tell us that there's incitement in this curriculum.
That's shocking. How receptive have you found the British government?
I found that we had a meeting in the House of Lords, extremely receptive. They know that this is a problem. People have written letters, but unfortunately, in a larger session in the House of Lords with the relevant minister, all the answers that we got were the Theeckhart Institute is looking into it. Well, now we see what the Theeckhart Institute did, and I hope that the British government does not wait 2 more years in order to stop funding hatred, because they are basically separating us from peace and not bringing us closer.
Let me ask you, on the ground here, I mean, you talk about the curriculum talks about the right of return and these sort of issues. How have you found your interactions with regular East Jerusalemites, and kind of how receptive are they to help, and how do they feel about their identity as Jerusalemites?
Well, I've got to say, I've been, I guess, surprised in the last few years as I've engaged with this more and more. I think that there's been a change in the attitudes in general in East Jerusalem. I'm not saying there's no hostility. There's so much work of understanding and reconciliation that we still have to do. But what I will say is that the people that I work with, first of all, there's more people that you can work with. So that's already a huge change. 5-10 years ago, very few organizations wanted to work with the Jerusalem municipality. Today, everybody's running to work with us because they understand that our only agenda is the good of the resident. We don't have a national political agenda here in Jerusalem. We're a municipality. This is local government. We want people's rubbish picked up. We want good education. We want good transport. And we want good economic development. That's what we're interested in. We're not going to be the people deciding on the future. So between the states and a peace agreement. So we're interested in the resident. And I think in the last 5 years, we've seen that the Arabs in East Jerusalem have realized this. A. B, they've realized that their salvation is not coming from the Palestinian Authority. All the Palestinian Authority has done is intimidate them not to normalize with the city, and have given them nothing. Absolutely no resources. Their schools are poorly funded. Their teachers are substandard, and the dropout rate in the Palestinian Authority run schools in East Jerusalem is shocking. We, for the first time in the last 2 years, actually have the resources to say, we will build a school for you. We have schools for you. Arab schools from Jerusalem. In other words, Hebrew is the second language. It's not the first language. Arab is the first language. Hebrew is the second language. I can show you the school books. They've been analyzed by experts. There's zero Zionism in the school books. It's very much a school book talking about reconciliation and building a better world for all our children. And so we, for the first time, can say the Palestinian Authority are not taking care of you. They're not providing you with any opportunity, but now we can. And that's the difference in the last few years. And there is a difference in attitude coming from the Arabs in Jerusalem, because now they know this, they've realized this, and many are working with us on a day-to-day. And plus, just speak to business people and you say to them, what would you like Jerusalem to be? And all of them say, we want to stay one city, we want to be under Israeli sovereignty, certainly want to be under the Jerusalem municipality. And that is what I find, surprisingly, shocking, that now many of the Arabs in East Jerusalem, I always say when the Trump peace plan was rolled out, there were many Arabs in East Jerusalem that breathed a sigh of relief that they're on our side.
So we spoke about the positive influence potentially of the UAE within the Israeli media. There's kind of growing concern about the influence of that Turkey has within East Jerusalem, not in a positive sense at all. How does that manifest itself, and how concerned are you about Turkish influence?
I am concerned about Turkish influence. Look, what we're seeing now, especially with this UAE-Israel-Abraham Accords, is a realignment of the Muslim Brotherhood on one side and the countries who are against the Muslim Brotherhood on the other side. And of course, we're on the other side of the Muslim Brotherhood, as is obvious. And so this is actually playing itself out here in Jerusalem. The Turks have been here for a number of years through non-profit organizations, offering free scholarships to students to go and study in Turkey. They're welcome to do that, of course. But their agenda is, of course, to build up the Muslim Brotherhood in Israel in general, in Jerusalem in particular. I'm very concerned. We need to do some decent research to see who is here, who they're loyal to, and who they're using. That is something that the Israeli government still yet has not engaged in looking into and dealing with. And I will be lobbying for this, not just from the Israeli government, but also from the international community.
Thank you. And just finally, if we can talk about the coronavirus, and how do you assess the state of it? Obviously, Jerusalem has two large groups of populations who are particularly both vulnerable and have been disproportionately affected, the ultra-Orthodox community, and now we're seeing growing numbers of concern also within East Jerusalem. How do you assess the state of play as it is?
Well, listen, I just received the list of red neighborhoods. Well, the good thing is that the government is not seeing Jerusalem as one big city. It's seeing us as the heterogenic city that we are, which is a city made of different neighborhoods, ultra-Orthodox Jews, secular Jews, Arabs, and everybody else. And so what I saw this morning in the list is it's primarily Arab neighborhoods and some ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. And I can tell you, hand in heart, I interviewed last night the Deputy Health Minister. We are only using one criteria and one criteria alone, and that is the number of sick people in the neighborhood. During the first wave, if a neighborhood had 1 in 1,000 corona patients, it didn't matter which neighborhood, they got put on lockdown as a neighborhood. We are using a mathematical criteria. We're not using any other criteria. But unfortunately, we have some cultural realities. And the cultural realities are that the ultra-Orthodox and the Arab communities have large families. They live, mainly the ultra-Orthodox, live in more confined spaces, more crowded spaces. The Arabs have bigger spaces because they live multi-generational families. And they're very communal people. Now, what happened? Why did the second wave happen? And why is it continuing? We went into an Arab festival and we went into wedding season in the Arab community. And what we saw was, and I spoke to many Arab friends of mine, people going to weddings, multiple weddings in one night, 500 people, 400 people, 1,000 people. It was an accident waiting to happen. The ultra-Orthodox, the same thing. They started praying together in large numbers. We saw a wedding 3 weeks ago of 3,000 people, of course, flagrantly against the health ministry rules. Some of them got fined, some of them have been have opened, there's files in the police at the moment, but that doesn't help because they were there that night, which means that 2 weeks later you're going to have another mini wave. And so unfortunately this is what's happened. Now, I will say that we could have done maybe more work in explaining the situation, in enforcing fines. But again, you go and you break up an Arab wedding, and the next thing they'll say is political. The same with the ultra-Orthodox. Both these communities, or very different communities, but have a lot of similarities, are complaining of discrimination in some ways. And in both communities that live in the largest numbers in Jerusalem, I say to them, it's purely mathematical. The old city, the Jewish part of the old city, is also on lockdown and is also a red community because, again, they live in crowded spaces. This is not about Jew and Arab. It's not about secular ultra-Orthodox. It's mainly about the numbers. The numbers, of course, this happened because of the different cultural habits of the different communities, and now we have to deal with that.
And finally, there's been a lot of criticism in the Israeli media about the government's handling of the coronavirus. How have you found, from a municipal perspective, how have you found that interaction between central government and local government?
Well, listen, I was very involved, of course, in the first wave. I think we did a good job. Second wave, I think that the city of Jerusalem and the mayor in particular, the mayor is Moshe Leon, is somebody who's very close. He comes from the government. He was the Director General of the Prime Minister's office, and he's had other very senior public roles. And he is in touch on a daily basis with the Home Front Command, which have taken part of the operations of the coronavirus. The Corona Tsar came to visit us 2 weeks ago to the city, and he said to us, if you weren't doing such a good job, we will have shut down the city, your whole city by now. We are the first ones. We had the pilot Corona hotels. We have, the mayor did something that nobody else did. He set up a command center in 5 languages to call up the people that we knew were sick, to convince them to get them out of their neighborhoods and their houses. Because when you live in a house of 8 children and you have corona and you live in 100 meters, you're going to be giving it to your entire family because you don't have your own bathroom and you can't isolate. And so the mayor set up a central command in order to convince and lobby for people to leave their house and into the corona hotels. That worked very well. We've, of course, reinstated that. And we're hoping that we will be able to tackle the numbers in Jerusalem the way that we managed to do in the first wave.
Well, we wish you every success with the battle against coronavirus, and also every success with the forum, the business forum with the UAE as well. We look forward to hearing more about it and seeing the fruits of your labours.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you.